Michael Reynolds held the pen above the final document, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do, and across the polished mahogany desk sat Nari, her smile warm and encouraging, her manicured fingers resting gently on a stack of papers that would, within 6 months, strip him of every dollar he'd spent 30 years, accumulating $700,000, transferred into accounts that would vanish like smoke, leaving him standing alone on a beach in Chiang Mai, staring at a building he would never own, trying to comprehend how the woman who'd whispered promises of partnership and love had orchestrated one of the most calculated property frauds the Thai coast had ever witnessed. But on that humid afternoon in April, sitting in what appeared to be a legitimate real estate office in Hua Hin, Mike Reynolds believed he was signing the papers that would give him everything he'd ever wanted: a second chance at life, a profitable business venture, and a beautiful woman who understood his vision for the future. The story of how an experienced commercial real estate developer from Denver, Colorado, could lose everything to a scam he should have recognized is not simply a tale of financial ruin. It is a masterclass in psychological manipulation, cultural exploitation, and the dangerous intersection of loneliness and ambition. If you've been enjoying the stories I create, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. Michael Reynolds turned 61 on a Saturday in February, sitting in his newly empty townhouse in Cherry Creek, Denver, signing the final divorce papers that would officially end his 28-year marriage to Catherine. The settlement was fair, painfully, so she received the house they'd built together, half of their retirement accounts, and custody of their golden retriever. He received his freedom, approximately $700,000 in liquid assets, and the crushing realization that he had no idea what to do with either. Mike had been a commercial real estate developer for 3 decades, specializing in strip malls and office complexes throughout the Denver metropolitan area. He understood property acquisition, zoning laws, construction timelines, and profit margins with the precision of a man who'd built his career on calculated risk. He'd made money, substantial amounts of it, but somewhere along the way, the marriage had collapsed under the weight of his constant travel, late nights, and emotional unavailability. Catherine had been kind during the divorce proceedings. There was no dramatic confrontation, no discovered affair, no single catastrophic event, just the slow, inevitable erosion of 2 people who'd stopped seeing each other years ago. She told him during their final conversation as married people that she hoped he'd find whatever it was he'd been searching for all those years he'd been building other people's dreams instead of his own. The comment haunted him through March as he packed his remaining belongings into a modest 2-bedroom apartment downtown. His daughter, Emily, was 26 and living in Portland, absorbed in her nonprofit work and barely returning his calls. His son, Jason, was finishing medical school in Boston and seemed relieved that the divorce meant he no longer had to navigate the tense holiday dinners that had characterized his last few years of childhood. Mike found himself, for the first time in his adult life, completely untethered. No wife, no family home, no daily obligations beyond the consulting contracts. He maintained more out of habit than necessity. He had money, he had time, and he had absolutely no purpose. It was during one of these long, empty evenings in April that Mike began researching international retirement destinations. He traveled extensively for business: Houston, Phoenix, Atlanta, occasionally Los Angeles, but always with the singular focus of deal-making. He'd never simply existed somewhere, experienced a place without the pressure of profit margins and client expectations. Thailand appeared repeatedly in his research. Articles praised its affordability, beautiful beaches, welcoming culture, and thriving expat community. Mike read testimonials from American and European retirees who'd relocated to places like Hua Hin, Pattaya, and Chiang Mai, describing lives of comfort, adventure, and purpose that seemed impossible on American Social Security alone. But what captured Mike's attention wasn't retirement in the traditional sense. It was the business opportunities. Multiple articles and forum posts discussed foreigners opening small hotels, guest houses, and boutique resorts along Thailand's extensive coastline. The investment amount seemed remarkably reasonable. Properties that would cost millions in Colorado were listed for a fraction of that in Thailand. Mike's developer instincts activated immediately. He began calculating potential returns, researching tourism statistics for various Thai beach towns, and studying photographs of beachfront properties with the analytical eye of someone who'd spent his career evaluating real estate potential. By the end of April, Mike had convinced himself that what he needed wasn't retirement, it was reinvention. He would go to Thailand, find a small boutique hotel property, renovate it to Western standards, and create something entirely his own. It would be profitable, it would be meaningful, and it would give him the purpose that had evaporated with his divorce. He booked a one-way ticket to Bangkok for early May, telling his daughter during a brief phone call that he was exploring opportunities in Southeast Asia. Emily's response was distracted, encouragement, her mind clearly elsewhere. Mike told himself that was fine. This journey was for him alone. Mike arrived at Suvarnabhumi Airport on a Tuesday evening in May, stepping into the humid Bangkok air with 2 large suitcases and a leather portfolio containing property research he'd compiled over the previous month. The heat struck him immediately thick, wet, enveloping completely, unlike Colorado's dry mountain climate. He'd arranged a driver through his hotel, and during the hour-long journey into the city, Mike pressed his face against the window, absorbing the chaotic energy of Bangkok's streets. Motorcycles weaved between cars with seemingly suicidal confidence. Street vendors operated beneath flickering fluorescent lights, and towering glass buildings rose alongside crumbling concrete structures in a collision of wealth and poverty that fascinated him. His hotel in Sukhumvit was modern and comfortable, the staff efficient and friendly. But Mike spent only 2 nights there. He wasn't interested in Bangkok's urban sprawl. His research had focused on Hua Hin and the surrounding coastal areas, beach towns approximately 200 kilometers south of Bangkok, that attracted both Thai and international tourists, seeking quieter alternatives to Phuket, Pattaya. Mike rented a car, something his hotel reception discouraged, but he insisted upon, wanting the freedom to explore independently. The drive south along Highway 35 took him through industrial zones that gradually gave way to agricultural land, palm plantations, and eventually glimpses of the Gulf of Thailand glittering in the afternoon Sunday. Hua Hin revealed itself as exactly what he'd hoped for, a coastal town that balanced tourist infrastructure with authentic Thai character. The beach stretched for kilometers, lined with restaurants, small hotels, and massage pavilions. The town center bustled with markets, temples, and a night market that sprawled across several blocks. But unlike Phuket or Pattaya, Hua Hin retained a sense of dignity, a place where Thai families vacationed alongside foreign tourists. Mike checked into a mid-range hotel near the beach and spent his first 3 days simply walking, observing, and calculating. He studied the occupancy rates of various hotels, noting which properties seemed perpetually full and which sat mostly empty. He ate at beachfront restaurants, conversing with owners about seasonal tourism patterns. He visited real estate offices, collecting brochures and business cards from agents eager to show properties to a clearly affluent American. It was during one of these property viewings, on his 4th day in Hua Hin, that Mike met Nari. The viewing was for a small guest house approximately 15 minutes north of central Hua Hin, a property listed by an agency called Pacific Properties Thailand. Mike had made the appointment the previous day, speaking with a woman whose English was excellent and whose knowledge of the property seemed comprehensive. When Mike arrived at the guest house at the agreed time of 10 o'clock in the morning, a woman was already waiting outside, leaning against a silver Toyota, her attention focused on her phone. She looked up as Mike's rental car approached, and her smile was immediate and genuine. Nari was 35 years old, though Mike would have guessed younger. She wore tailored black trousers, a cream-colored blouse, and minimal jewelry, professional but not severe. Her English, as promised, was flawless, with only the slightest accent that Mike found charming rather than difficult to understand. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Nari from Pacific Properties. Thank you for coming." The guest house itself was unremarkable: 10 rooms, basic furnishings, outdated bathrooms, and a small restaurant area that looked like it hadn't served food in years. Mike walked through methodically, noting structural issues, calculating renovation costs, and asking questions about occupancy history, utility costs, and the terms of the existing lease. Nari answered every question with impressive specificity. She explained that the current owner was a Thai family looking to sell because they'd moved to Bangkok for work. She detailed the property's zoning classification, its proximity to the beach, and the average room rates commanded by similar properties in the area. But what struck Mike most wasn't her knowledge, it was her attentiveness. She didn't simply recite information robotically. She asked him questions. What was his vision for a property? What was his experience in hospitality? What had brought him to Thailand? They spent 2 hours at the guest house, far longer than Mike had intended. The conversation drifted from business to personal topics naturally. Mike found himself explaining his recent divorce, his career in Denver, his desire to create something meaningful in this new chapter of his life. Nari listened with an intensity that felt both professional and genuinely caring. She shared her own story, raised in Bangkok, educated in hotel management at a university in Chiang Mai, worked for several international hotel chains before transitioning into real estate consulting. She'd moved to Hua Hin 3 years ago, she explained, because she loved the coast and wanted to help foreigners navigate the complexities of Thai property investment. Many foreigners lose money in Thailand, she said as they stood outside the guest house, the late morning sun climbing higher. Not because they're not smart, but because they don't understand the culture, the laws, the way business works here. I want to help people like you succeed, not just make a quick commission. The comment resonated deeply with Mike. He'd already encountered several agents who seemed more interested in closing deals than ensuring he understood what he was purchasing. Nari felt different, thoughtful, ethical, genuinely invested in his success. Before they parted, Nari gave Mike her business card and suggested they meet for coffee the following day to discuss his goals more comprehensively. I have access to properties that aren't listed publicly, she said, off-market opportunities that might be perfect for someone with your vision and resources. Mike agreed immediately, already feeling that he'd found exactly the kind of local partner he needed. Over the following 2 weeks, Mike and Nari met nearly every day. What began as professional property viewings gradually evolved into something more complex, a friendship that blurred the boundaries between business and personal connection in ways Mike found both exciting and slightly unsettling. Nari showed him a dozen properties along the coast between Hua Hin and Cha Am, ranging from small guest houses to larger boutique hotels. She was never pushy, never insistent. Instead, she educated him, explaining the advantages and disadvantages of each location, the realistic costs of renovation and operation, and the legal structures foreigners needed to understand when investing in Thai property. It was during one of these educational sessions, sitting at a beachfront cafe in Cha Am, that Nari explained the fundamental challenge facing Mike. Under Thai law, foreigners cannot own land. Mike had encountered this information during his research, but hearing it explained in detail created a knot of anxiety in his stomach. Nari, however, remained calm and reassuring. There are legal structures, she explained, sipping her iced coffee. The most common is establishing a Thai limited company, where Thai nationals hold 51% of the shares and you hold 49%. You maintain control through preferred shares and shareholder agreements, but on paper, the company is Thai majority owned. Mike frowned. So I'd own less than half of my own investment? On paper, yes, Nari said. But in practice, with proper legal documentation, you control everything: operations, finances, decision-making. The Thai shareholders are what we call nominee shareholders. They don't have real power. They're simply fulfilling the legal requirement. Is that legal? Nari's smile was patient. It's common. Thousands of foreign business owners use this structure. The key is having an excellent lawyer who prepares the correct documents. I work with a law firm that specializes in foreign property investment. They've handled hundreds of these cases. Mike listened carefully as Nari continued explaining alternative structures, long-term leases, usufruct agreements, condominium ownership. Each option had advantages and limitations, but the Thai limited company structure seemed to be the most commonly recommended for someone wanting to operate a hotel business. The most important thing, Nari emphasized, is trust. You need to work with Thai partners you trust completely. That's where many foreigners fail. They rush into agreements with people they barely know. The irony of that statement, in retrospect, would haunt Mike for years. Their relationship shifted during the 3rd week of May. Nari invited Mike to dinner at a restaurant she described as the best seafood in Hua Hin, but only locals know about it. The restaurant was indeed hidden, located down a narrow soi off the main road, with plastic chairs and no English menu, but the food was extraordinary. Grilled prawns the size of Mike's forearm, whole fish in tamarind sauce, spicy som tam salad that made his eyes water. Nari ordered for them both, explaining each dish's ingredients and regional origins. She taught him to eat Thai style, mixing different dishes together on his plate, balancing flavors of sweet, sour, salty, and spicy. The intimacy of the meal, her fingers occasionally brushing his as she served him food, her laughter at his clumsy attempts to use chopsticks felt deliberate and natural at once. After dinner, they walked along the beach, the Gulf of Thailand, dark and calm under a crescent moon. Nari spoke about her marriage, a brief union in her late 20s that had ended badly when her husband, a Thai businessman, had gambled away their savings and disappeared to avoid debt collectors. "I understand what it's like to start over," she said quietly. "To rebuild your life when you thought you had everything figured out. That's why I connect with clients like you. I see the courage it takes to try again." Mike found himself sharing more than he'd intended. His feelings of failure surrounding the divorce, his strained relationships with his children, his fear that he'd reach 61 without ever really knowing himself. Nari listened without judgment, occasionally touching his arm in gestures of comfort and understanding. When she kissed him that night, standing in the hotel parking lot beside his rental car, Mike felt a rush of emotions he hadn't experienced in decades. Desire, certainly, but also hope, possibility, the intoxicating sense that his life was finally beginning rather than ending. They became lovers by the end of that week, though Nari insisted they keep the relationship private. "In Thai culture, people gossip," she explained. "If other agents know we're together, they might try to sabotage your deals or spread rumors that I'm taking advantage of you. For both our sakes, we should be discreet." Mike agreed, though part of him wanted to announce their relationship publicly, to prove to himself, and perhaps to his ex-wife, that he was still capable of inspiring desire and affection. The romance and the business discussions became inseparable. They would spend mornings viewing properties, afternoons making love in Mike's hotel room, and evenings planning the future they would build together. Nari spoke about their potential partnership with increasing conviction. "Our hotel, our business, our life together." It was intoxicating. Mike, who'd spent 30 years building other people's commercial properties, was now imagining something entirely his own, shared with a woman who seemed to understand him in ways Catherine never had. The property that would ultimately destroy Mike Reynolds was a 12-room boutique hotel called Bontelay, located approximately 3 kilometers south of Chiang Mai, on a quiet stretch of beach between the main tourist areas. Nari brought him there on a Wednesday morning in early June, after mentioning casually during breakfast that she'd heard about an off-market opportunity that might be perfect for his vision. The hotel was closed, clearly abandoned for some time. The gate was locked, and weeds pushed through cracks in the parking area. But even in its deteriorated state, Mike could see the potential. The building was 2 stories, white stucco with blue trim, positioned less than 50 meters from the beach. The architecture was traditional Thai colonial fusion-peaked roofs, covered terraces, wooden shutters on the windows. They climbed over the gate, Nari laughing as she did so, saying they'd get permission later, but she wanted Mike to see it first. The interior smelled of mildew and neglect, but the bones of the structure were solid. 12 rooms spread across 2 floors, each with ocean views. A large common area on the ground floor that could serve as a restaurant and bar. A small swimming pool in the courtyard, currently green with algae but salvageable. Mike walked through slowly, his developer's eye cataloging everything water damage on the ceilings, outdated electrical systems, bathrooms that needed complete replacement, furniture that should be discarded. But the location was extraordinary. Private beach access, stunning views, far enough from the chaos of central Hua Hin to feel exclusive, but close enough to attract tourists. "Who owns it?" Mike asked as they stood on the second-floor terrace, watching waves roll onto the empty beach. Nari pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. "A Thai family. The father built it 15 years ago, but he died 3 years back. The children have been fighting over the inheritance, and meanwhile, the property just sits here deteriorating. They're motivated to sell quickly and quietly to avoid more family conflict. Why isn't it listed with agencies? Family disputes make everything complicated," Nari explained. "They don't want public attention, legal scrutiny, questions about inheritance documentation. They want a cash buyer who can close quickly, no financing complications, no lengthy negotiations. That's why I heard about it through private connections. Mike felt the familiar rush of a good deal, the sensation he'd experienced hundreds of times in Denver when he identified an undervalued property before competitors noticed. What are they asking? Nari hesitated, as if reluctant to disappoint him with a high price. $350,000 US. I know that sounds high for something in this condition. That's not high, Mike interrupted. For beachfront property with this much potential? In Colorado, a property like this would cost $3 million, minimum. That's incredibly reasonable. Nari smiled, but it was tinged with concern. Mike, you need to understand something. The price is reasonable because the legal situation is complicated. The property would need to go into a Thai company structure, and because of the inheritance issues, the family wants the sale to happen very quickly within 60 days, ideally. That's fine. I can move quickly. There's more. Nari moved closer, her voice dropping as if sharing a confidence. Because of how Thai property law works and the specific family situation, the company that purchases the property would need to be in my name initially. We'd transfer your ownership stake after the purchase completes, and the family inheritance issues are legally resolved. It's a timing issue, not a trust issue. Mike felt the first flutter of doubt. The company would be in your name? Only temporarily, Nari said quickly. 60 to 90 days maximum. My lawyer can explain the legal reasoning better than I can, but essentially, because you're a foreign national, and this is an active inheritance case, having the initial purchase go through an established Thai citizen creates fewer complications. Once the property is ours, and the inheritance is settled, we'd restructure the company with you as the majority shareholder. She pulled out her phone again, showing Mike documents that appeared to be legal filings in Thai, translated sections highlighting inheritance disputes and property law complications that Mike didn't fully understand, but which seemed to support her explanation. I know this sounds unusual, Nari continued, and I completely understand if you're not comfortable. We can keep looking for other properties with simpler legal situations. But Mike, opportunities like this beachfront boutique hotels at this price, they don't come available often. And honestly, the only reason I'm even telling you about it is because I trust you, and I believe we can build something beautiful together. The final sentence landed perfectly, combining business with romantic intimacy in a way that made Mike feel that questioning her would be questioning their entire relationship. How would the money transfer work? Mike asked, trying to maintain some analytical distance. You'd wire the funds to the law firm's escrow account. They're licensed, regulated, everything completely legal. The funds stay in escrow until all documentation is prepared and verified. Then the purchase completes, and you get full documentation proving your investment. After the inheritance issues clear, we restructure the company ownership and everything is officially in your name. Mike stood silently on the terrace, calculation and emotion warring within him. The developer in him recognized this was exactly the kind of undervalued asset he'd built his career finding. The location was perfect, the price reasonable, the potential substantial. With proper renovation, this hotel could generate significant returns. But the deal structure made him uncomfortable. Putting hundreds of thousands of dollars into a company structure, initially controlled by someone else, even someone he was sleeping with, violated every principle of due diligence he'd practiced for 3 decades. Nari seemed to sense his hesitation. She moved beside him, slipping her hand into his. I understand this is a lot to think about. Take your time. We can schedule a meeting with the lawyer next week, and you can ask every question you have. If anything doesn't feel right after that, we'll walk away and find something else. I'm not going to pressure you into something you're not comfortable with. The reassurance worked precisely because she wasn't pushing. Mike squeezed her hand, looking out at the beach and imagining this property transformed: fresh paint, modern furnishings, tourists lounging by a clean swimming pool, sunset dinners served on the terrace. Let's meet with the lawyer, Mike said. The law office of Somchai & Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a modern building in central Hua Hin, complete with a glass reception area, professional staff, and wall-mounted certificates that appeared to legitimize the entire operation. Mike arrived for his 11 o'clock appointment on Monday morning, Nari already waiting in the reception area, dressed in a business suit that emphasized the professional rather than romantic aspects of their relationship. The lawyer, Kun Somchai Ratanakorn was approximately 50 years old, wearing an expensive watch and speaking English with British-influenced precision that suggested education abroad. His office was lined with law books, framed degrees from Chulalongkorn University, and photographs showing him at various legal conferences and with what appeared to be government officials. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Kun Somchai explained Thai property law with a thoroughness that impressed Mike, covering foreign ownership restrictions, company structure requirements, and the specific legal complications created by inheritance disputes like the one affecting the Bontelay property. The situation is indeed unusual, Kun Somchai acknowledged, but not unprecedented. The family wishes to avoid probate complications, which in Thailand can take years and cost substantial amounts in legal fees. By selling through a private company transfer, they can complete the transaction more efficiently. Mike asked about the temporary ownership structure, why the company would initially be in Nari's name. Kun Somchai's explanation was complex, involving legal terminology Mike didn't entirely follow but which sounded legitimate. Foreign business registration timelines, inheritance law restrictions, probate court requirements. The key protection for you, Kun Somchai said, is the shareholder agreement and the secured loan structure. You will be documented as the primary investor through a loan agreement secured against the property. If anything prevents the ownership transfer from occurring as planned, you would have first claim against the asset. Additionally, we will prepare a shareholder agreement that gives you operational control regardless of the ownership percentages. The lawyer presented draft documents, pages of Thai text with English translations, corporate bylaws, shareholder agreements, secured loan contracts. It looked legitimate, overwhelmingly so. Mike's developer experience had involved countless closings, and the paperwork resembled the kind of comprehensive documentation he was accustomed to seeing. How long would the temporary structure remain in place? Mike asked. 60 to 90 days maximum, Kun Somchai replied. Once the inheritance dispute is officially resolved, and the family has engaged separate counsel to accelerate that process, we will transfer the company shares to reflect your investment accurately. I stake my professional reputation on ensuring this happens correctly. Mike requested time to review the documents with an independent lawyer, a suggestion Kun Somchai not only supported but encouraged. Absolutely. I would never recommend a client proceed without independent verification. Take these documents, consult with any lawyer you choose, and when you're satisfied, we'll proceed. The meeting concluded with handshakes and reassurances. Nari walked Mike to his car, where he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, reading through the translated documents. What do you think? Nari asked, leaning through the passenger window. It seems legitimate, Mike admitted, but I'm going to find an independent lawyer to review everything. This is too much money to risk without proper verification. Of course, Nari agreed. That's the smart thing to do. There's a lawyer in Hua Hin who specializes in advising foreign investors, Kun Prasert. He's very well respected, not connected to Somchai's firm at all. I can get you his contact information. The fact that Nari supported independent verification eased Mike's concerns significantly. Someone running a scam wouldn't encourage additional legal scrutiny, he reasoned. Mike met with Kun Prasert 2 days later. The second lawyer's office was smaller, less impressive, but his credentials seemed solid. Mike explained the deal structure, presented the draft documents, and asked for an honest assessment. Kun Prasert reviewed everything carefully, occasionally making notes, asking questions about the property location and the family selling it. After nearly 2 hours, he rendered his opinion. The structure is unusual but not illegal, Kun Prasert said. The temporary ownership arrangement is indeed used sometimes in complicated inheritance sales. The secured loan agreement does provide protection. However, Mr. Reynolds, I must emphasize your protection is entirely dependent on the documents being legally enforceable and the other parties acting in good faith. If fraud is involved, these documents provide limited practical recourse. How do I verify there's no fraud? That's very difficult, Kun Prasert admitted. You could research the lawyer's reputation, visit the property office to verify ownership records, conduct background checks on the parties involved. But ultimately, cross-border property investment always involves risk. I can verify the documents are legally valid, but I cannot verify the intentions of the people you're dealing with. It was an honest answer, but not particularly helpful. Mike left the meeting feeling informed but not reassured. The documents were legal, but that didn't guarantee the deal was legitimate. That evening, Mike discussed his concerns with Nari over dinner at his hotel. She listened patiently, never becoming defensive, acknowledging that his caution was reasonable. "I've known Kun Somchai for 3 years," Nari said. "I've referred multiple clients to him, foreigners who've successfully purchased properties through his firm. I can give you their contact information if you want to speak with them." "That would help," Mike said. Nari provided 3 names and phone numbers that night. Over the following 2 days, Mike contacted all 3, an Australian man who'd purchased a condo in Hua Hin, a British couple who owned a small restaurant, and a German retiree with a guest house in Cha Am. All 3 confirmed working with Kun Somchai, praised his professionalism, and reported successful property transactions. What Mike didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that all 3 were part of Nari's network, paid small amounts to provide positive references to potential marks. The final factor in Mike's decision was Nari herself. They'd been together for 6 weeks now, seeing each other almost daily, their relationship deepening in ways that felt genuine and substantial. She'd introduced him to her friends, taken him to meet her mother in Bangkok, integrated him into her life in ways that seemed incompatible with planning to defraud him. One night, lying together in his hotel room, Mike asked her directly, "Are you scamming me?" Nari's reaction was immediate and emotional. She pulled away, tears forming in her eyes. "How can you ask me that? After everything we've shared?" "I have to ask," Mike said gently. "This is my entire retirement savings. If I lose this money, I have nothing." "Then don't invest," Nari said, her voice breaking. "If you don't trust me, don't do the deal. I'll help you find other properties, other opportunities." "But Mike, what we have together, this isn't business. Yes, I'm helping you invest, but that's not why I'm with you. I'm with you because I love you." It was the first time she'd used that word. Mike pulled her close, apologizing for doubting her, reassuring her that his questions came from caution rather than distrust. By the end of the conversation, his decision was made. He would invest in Bontelay. The money transfer occurred in 3 stages over 6 weeks, each installment representing a deeper commitment and a narrowing window of escape. The first payment of $350,000 went directly to Kun Somchai's escrow account in mid-June, designated for the property purchase. Mike wire transferred the funds from his bank in Denver, providing all requested documentation proving the money's legitimate origin. Kun Somchai confirmed receipt within 24 hours, providing official escrow receipts and updated corporate documents showing the formation of Bontelay Resort Company Limited, with Nari listed as the primary shareholder and Mike as the secured creditor. The documents looked perfect, embossed seals, official stamps, registered with the Department of Business Development. Mike received copies of everything, along with photographs of the signed purchase agreement between the company and the selling family. With the property supposedly secured, the renovation planning began immediately. Nari coordinated with contractors, obtaining estimates for electrical upgrades, bathroom renovations, painting, furniture, pool cleaning, and restaurant equipment. The quotes totaled approximately $200,000, which Mike had budgeted for. But Nari suggested they could reduce costs significantly by purchasing materials directly and hiring labor separately, rather than using established contractors. "Thai contractors add huge markups," she explained. "If we buy materials ourselves and I supervise the work, we can save $40,000 or $50,000. Mike agreed, impressed by her frugality. Over the following 3 weeks, he transferred an additional $200,000 into the company account, with Nari providing detailed receipts for materials, labor deposits, and permit fees. The renovation work appeared to begin. Nari sent him daily photographs showing workers at the property painting walls, installing new air conditioning units, retiling bathrooms. The transformation looked genuine and impressive. The hotel was taking shape exactly as Mike had envisioned. During this period, Mike and Nari were inseparable. They spent mornings at the property discussing design choices, afternoons shopping for furniture and decor, evenings planning the grand opening. Nari created a social media presence for the hotel, began taking reservations for an August opening, and even hired 2 staff members, a housekeeper and a maintenance worker, whose salaries Mike began paying. The relationship had evolved into something domestic and comfortable. Mike was effectively living with Nari now, staying at her apartment rather than his hotel. They shopped for groceries together, cooked meals, watched Thai television programs she would translate and explain. Mike began learning basic Thai phrases, studied Buddhism to understand the culture better, and even accompanied Nari to her mother's birthday celebration in Bangkok, where he was introduced as her boyfriend and future business partner. Everything felt real, everything felt right. The third financial request came in late July, just 2 weeks before the planned August opening. Nari came to Mike looking distressed, explaining that they'd encountered unexpected problems. The hotel's electrical system required complete replacement rather than simple upgrades, and the local government was demanding additional licensing fees they hadn't anticipated. "How much?" Mike asked. $150,000, Nari said quietly. "I know it's more than we planned, but if we don't fix the electrical system properly, we can't pass inspection. And the licensing fees are non-negotiable without them. We can't legally operate." Mike felt the first serious alarm. He'd already invested $550,000, and now another $150,000 was being requested with the opening only weeks away. His Denver bank account was down to $160,000 effectively, his emergency fund and all that remained of his life savings. "Can we get a loan?" Mike suggested. "Use the property as collateral?" Nari shook her head. "Thai banks won't lend against property during the ownership transfer period, and we can't delay the opening we already have. Reservations, staff hired, commitments made. If we postpone now, we lose credibility and deposits." Mike spent 2 sleepless nights considering his options. Walking away now meant losing everything he'd already invested. Pushing forward meant risking his final reserves. But the hotel was so close to opening, the transformation so nearly complete. He made what seemed like the only rational decision. He transferred the additional $150,000 in early August. The total investment now stood at $700,000. Mike had $3,000 remaining in his U.S. bank account and approximately 80,000 baht in his Thai account. He was financially committed beyond any possibility of retreat. The hotel's soft opening was scheduled for August 15th. Nari planned a small celebration, local officials, travel journalists, a few early guests who'd booked at discounted rates. Mike purchased a new suit for the occasion, practiced the short speech he would deliver, and allowed himself to feel the pride and excitement of a dream realized. On August 14th, the day before the opening, Nari didn't answer her phone. Mike initially assumed Nari was simply overwhelmed with final preparations. She'd mentioned having meetings with suppliers, final inspections, media confirmations. He spent the morning of August 14th buying wine and champagne for the following day's celebration, arranging transportation for guests, and reviewing his speech. By afternoon, when Nari still hadn't responded to his calls or messages, Mike began feeling uneasy. He drove to her apartment, the place they'd been sharing for the past month, and found the door locked, no response to his knocking. He went next to the property, to Bontelay itself. The gate was closed, but not locked. Mike pushed it open and walked into the courtyard. What he found made his stomach drop. The property looked exactly as it had looked the first day Nari had shown it to him in June. Weeds pushing through the parking area, green algae in the pool, windows shuttered and dark. There was no evidence of renovation, no fresh paint, no new air conditioning units, no retiled bathrooms. Mike's hands were shaking as he walked through the building. Inside, everything was unchanged. The same mildewed smell, the same water-damaged ceilings, the same deteriorated furniture. The photographs Nari had been sending him for weeks, images of workers painting, installing fixtures, transforming the space, had been taken somewhere else entirely, possibly at a different property, possibly staged specifically to deceive him. Mike stood in the empty lobby, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. $700,000. Gone. The woman he'd loved, trusted, planned a future with, gone. The business he'd devoted 3 months to building non-existent. He called Kun Somchai's office. The phone rang but went to voicemail. Mike left increasingly frantic messages demanding explanations, threatening legal action, begging for someone to call him back. He drove to Kun Somchai's office building in Hua Hin. The third-floor suite was empty, completely vacant. No furniture, no law books, no framed degrees. The building's security guard explained in broken English that the office had been leased short-term and vacated 2 days ago. Mike returned to Nari's apartment and convinced the building's management to open the door, claiming he was her boyfriend and worried about her safety. The apartment was empty. Not just unoccupied, completely empty. No furniture, no clothes, no personal items. The place had been professionally cleaned, every trace of habitation removed. Mike spent that night sitting on the floor of the empty apartment, calling Nari's phone repeatedly, listening to it ring and ring with no answer. He called the 3 references who'd vouched for Kun Somchai. All 3 numbers were disconnected. At some point during the night, the full horror of his situation crystallized. He'd been systematically defrauded by an organized criminal operation. Every element had been carefully orchestrated. The legitimate appearing law office, the staged renovation photographs, the character references, the romantic relationship itself. Nari had never loved him. The intimacy they'd shared, the future they'd planned, the integration into her life and family, all of it had been theater, a performance designed to extract $700,000 from a lonely American man desperate to believe he was still capable of inspiring love. Mike filed a police report at the Hua Hin police station on August 16th, the day that was supposed to be his hotel's grand opening. The process was bureaucratic and frustrating, conducted through a translator, with police officers who seemed sympathetic but not particularly optimistic about recovery. The detective assigned to the case, Lieutenant Surasak, explained the fundamental problem. The property purchase had been structured as a civil contract between private parties. Unless Mike could prove criminal fraud, which required demonstrating that Nari had intentionally deceived him from the beginning, rather than simply failing to follow through on legitimate business plans, the case would be considered a civil dispute rather than a criminal matter. "You gave money to a Thai company that you did not control," Lieutenant Surasak said through the translator. "The company failed to renovate the property. This is a business dispute, not theft." Mike protested that the entire operation was fraud. The fake law office, the staged photographs, the non-existent renovation work. Lieutenant Surasak acknowledged these facts, suggested criminal activity, but explained that proving it required finding Nari, finding the money, and establishing a clear pattern of intentional deception. "We will investigate," the lieutenant said. "But Mr. Reynolds, you must understand this is very common. Foreign men come to Thailand, meet Thai women, give them money for business ventures, and then the women disappear. Sometimes it is deliberate fraud. Sometimes it is simply Thai women taking advantage of generous foreign men. The line between these things is difficult to prove." Mike researched Nari obsessively over the following days, using every investigative tool available. He discovered that Nari Pattaya was likely not her real name. The phone number he'd been calling was registered to a prepaid SIM card purchased with false identification. Pacific Properties Thailand had no official business registration. The apartment she'd lived in had been leased under a different name through a rental agent who claimed to have never met the actual tenant. Most devastating was Mike's discovery that he wasn't the first victim. Through online forums for foreign property investors in Thailand, Mike found 3 similar stories. American and European men who'd met a woman matching Nari's description, invested in property deals that proved fraudulent, and lost substantial amounts of money. The stories dated back over 5 years, suggesting an organized, professional operation. Mike contacted a Bangkok-based investigative journalist named Kritika Prasert, who specialized in foreign investment fraud cases. Kritika agreed to meet with him, listened to his story, and explained that she'd been tracking similar scams for years. "This is a sophisticated operation," Kritika said. "Multiple people involved: the woman who plays the girlfriend, the lawyer with his fake office, the character references, probably someone creating the staged renovation photographs. They target recently divorced or widowed foreign men with substantial savings who are emotionally vulnerable and unfamiliar with Thai law." Kritika explained that prosecution was unlikely. Thai police resources were limited. The perpetrators were skilled at disappearing, and the legal system prioritized clear-cut criminal cases over complex fraud investigations involving foreign victims. "Your best option is to make noise," Kritika advised. "Tell your story publicly, provide photographs of her, warn other potential victims, make it difficult for her to operate. These scammers rely on anonymity, and their victims' shame keeping them silent." Mike initially resisted. The humiliation of admitting he'd been so thoroughly deceived felt overwhelming. His daughter Emily, when he finally called to explain what had happened, was both sympathetic and confused, unable to understand how her financially savvy father could have been so reckless. But as the weeks passed, and Mike's shock gave way to anger. He agreed to work with Critica on an investigative article exposing the scam. The article, published in a Bangkok-based English-language newspaper in September, included Mike's full story, photographs of Nari, details of the fake law office, and warnings about the tactics used in these romance property fraud schemes. The article generated significant attention within Thailand's expat community. Multiple men came forward with similar stories, some involving the same woman, others describing nearly identical patterns with different perpetrators. The collective stories revealed a fraud network operating primarily along Thailand's beach resort areas, targeting foreign retirees and divorced men seeking property investments and romantic connections. Thai police, pressured by the media attention, announced investigations into several cases. In October, 3 months after Mike's money disappeared, police arrested a woman in Phuket, operating under a different name, but matching Nari's description. She was wanted in connection with another property fraud case involving a German national. However, none of Mike's money was recovered. The arrested woman claimed to have no connection to the Hua Hin case. The funds Mike had transferred had moved through multiple accounts across several countries and were essentially untraceable. Mike's life contracted dramatically. With only $3,000 remaining in his U.S. account, he couldn't afford to return to America. He moved to Chiang Mai, where the cost of living was lower than Hua Hin, and rented a modest studio apartment for 7,000 baht monthly. He began working remotely, picking up freelance consulting contracts, advising American companies on commercial real estate development. The work paid enough to cover his basic living expenses in Thailand, but nothing more. His retirement savings, accumulated over 30 years of careful investing, were gone entirely. The psychological damage exceeded the financial loss. Mike struggled with depression, insomnia, and obsessive rumination about the warning signs he'd ignored. He'd been a successful developer, someone who'd built a career on careful analysis and calculated risk. Yet he'd handed $700,000 to a woman he'd known for 3 months, based on romantic feelings and forged documents. The shame was crushing, not just the financial failure, but the emotional betrayal. He'd believed Nari loved him. He'd integrated her into his vision of his future. The intimacy they'd shared, the conversations, the laughter, the physical connection, had felt genuine. Discovering it was performance art, a professional deception designed to extract money, shattered something fundamental in Mike's ability to trust. By December, 6 months after the scam, Mike had developed a structured routine that gave his life minimal stability. He worked mornings on consulting contracts, spent afternoons at a small cafe where he'd befriended the owner, and evenings alone in his apartment, reading or watching television, avoiding the expat bars where he might encounter pity or judgment. The investigative article had made him semi-famous within Thailand's foreign community, which Mike experienced as both validation and humiliation. Some people approached him with sympathy, sharing their own stories of Thai scams or near misses. Others avoided him as if his victimhood was contagious, proof that Thailand was dangerous for naive foreigners. Mike began volunteering his time with a non-profit organization that advised foreign investors on Thai property law, helping others avoid the mistakes he'd made. The work was unpaid but purposeful, transforming his catastrophic experience into preventative education. Through this volunteer work, Mike connected with other fraud victims, forming a small support network of men who'd lost money in similar romance investment scams. The group met monthly, ostensibly to share information and legal strategies, but functioning primarily as therapy. Men in their 50s and 60s, all successful in their previous lives, all devastated by how thoroughly they'd been manipulated. One member of the group, a retired British engineer named Thomas, articulated what Mike had struggled to express. "It's not really about the money, is it? It's about discovering that your judgment, your ability to read people, your confidence in your own intelligence, all of it was worthless. You got played completely, and you never even saw it happening." The observation resonated painfully with Mike. His career had been built on evaluation, assessing properties, negotiating contracts, identifying promising investments. He'd considered himself shrewd, analytical, difficult to deceive. Yet Nari had manipulated him effortlessly, exploiting his loneliness and his desire for significance with professional precision. Mike's relationship with his children remained strained. Emily visited him in Chiang Mai in January, staying for a week in what felt like a wellness check rather than a genuine reunion. She was kind but clearly worried, encouraging him to return to the United States, to seek therapy, to rebuild his life in familiar surroundings. But Mike couldn't imagine returning to America. The prospect of facing former colleagues, explaining what had happened, admitting that his grand retirement adventure had ended in total failure, it felt impossible. Thailand, despite being the site of his destruction, had become the only place where his current reduced circumstances felt acceptable. He remained in Chiang Mai, living modestly, working enough to survive, and carrying the weight of his loss daily. The physical aspects of his life were manageable. The small apartment was comfortable. The city was beautiful. His health remained reasonably good. But the psychological burden never truly lifted. The question that haunted Mike most persistently was whether any of it had been real. Had Nari felt anything genuine during their months together? Or had every smile, every touch, every whispered intimacy been calculated performance? Mike would never know, and that uncertainty corroded his memories, making it impossible to remember their time together without contamination by the knowledge of her betrayal. By the summer, a year after the scam, Mike had achieved a fragile equilibrium. He had accepted that his money was gone forever, that legal recourse was impossible, that his retirement would be defined by financial constraint rather than the comfortable security he'd planned. He continued his consulting work, maintained his volunteer activities, and slowly began building something resembling a life in Chiang Mai. The investigative journalist, Kritika, contacted him occasionally with updates. The woman arrested in Phuket had been convicted in a different fraud case and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Thai police had identified a larger network of individuals running similar property scams targeting foreigners, though actual prosecutions remained rare. Mike's story, combined with others, had generated enough publicity that Thai authorities implemented some reforms, stricter requirements for property transaction, documentation, increased penalties for foreigners operating fake businesses, and enhanced warning systems at airports and tourist offices. Whether these measures would actually reduce fraud remained uncertain, but Mike took minimal satisfaction in knowing his disaster might prevent others from experiencing the same fate. 3 years after losing $700,000 to a woman named Nari or whoever she actually was, Michael Reynolds, now 64 years old, sat in a modest cafe in Chiang Mai's old city, working on a consulting report for a Denver-based development firm. His laptop was 7 years old, his apartment was smaller than any place he'd lived since college, and his savings account contained approximately $18,000, barely enough to cover 6 months of living expenses. The financial devastation was permanent. Mike would never recover the money he'd lost. He would never own property, never retire comfortably, never experience the security he'd spent 30 years building. He worked not by choice, but by necessity, and would likely continue working until health or age made it impossible. But the deeper damage wasn't financial. It was the fundamental destruction of his ability to trust in others, certainly, but more devastatingly, in himself. Mike had rebuilt aspects of his life in Thailand, but he'd never rebuilt his confidence in his own judgment. Every decision now carried the shadow of that catastrophic error, the reminder that he'd been comprehensively fooled by someone he'd loved. Mike never dated again. The few times women expressed interest, he felt only suspicion and fear. The possibility that someone might genuinely find him attractive or interesting felt less plausible than the certainty they were running some variation of Nari's scam. He'd become exactly what he'd pitied before, a damaged, paranoid man whose past had destroyed his capacity for present happiness. His relationship with his children had improved marginally. Emily called monthly, their conversations carefully avoiding the topic of money or Thailand or what might have been. Jason had graduated medical school and begun his residency, his life successfully established despite his father's collapse. Mike sent small birthday gifts and maintained the appearance of paternal involvement, but the gap between them felt unbridgeable. The investigative article about Mike's case had generated lasting impact. Kritika Prasert had continued reporting on foreign investment fraud in Thailand, and her work had influenced policy changes and increased awareness. Mike received occasional emails from people thanking him for sharing his story, explaining that his warnings had prevented them from similar mistakes. These messages provided minimal comfort but served as evidence that his catastrophic loss had generated some marginal social benefit. The woman who'd called herself Nari was never found. The person arrested in Phuket proved to be someone else entirely, running a similar scam but unconnected to Mike's case. Police concluded that Nari had likely fled Thailand or simply adopted a new identity and continued operating elsewhere. The $700,000 Mike had transferred moved through accounts in Singapore, Hong Kong, and eventually disappeared into financial structures, too complex and international to trace. Mike occasionally searched for her online, examining photographs of women in Thai property forums or social media, wondering if he'd recognize her, if he'd feel anything if he did. But the searching felt compulsive rather than purposeful, another symptom of the trauma that still defined his existence. The boutique hotel that never existed, Bontelay, the golden beachfront property that had represented Mike's dreams of reinvention, remained abandoned, slowly deteriorating under Thailand's tropical climate. Mike drove past it once, approximately 2 years after the scam, wanting to confront the physical site of his destruction. The property looked even worse than it had initially, roof tiles missing, vegetation reclaiming the courtyard, windows broken. It wasn't owned by anyone Mike had given money to. It had probably always been owned by someone else entirely, a legitimate property that Nari had simply used as a prop in her theatrical fraud. Standing outside that ruined building, Mike had experienced something unexpected, not anger or grief, but a strange detachment, as if he were observing someone else's disaster from a safe distance. The money was gone, the relationship had been fiction, the business had never existed. All of it had been illusion, and he'd been the willing participant in his own deception. Mike returned to his apartment in Chiang Mai that evening and wrote a final addendum to his story, which Critica published as a follow-up article. In it, he tried to articulate what he'd learned, though he wasn't certain any of it would prevent others from making similar mistakes. "You want to believe you're different," Mike wrote. "You want to believe that your intelligence, your experience, your success in other areas of life makes you immune to manipulation. You want to believe that the person showing you affection is genuine, that the opportunity being offered is real, that your judgment about people and situations is reliable. But sophisticated scammers understand these desires better than you understand them yourself. They don't target stupid people. They target confident people whose self-assurance prevents them from recognizing danger. They don't create obvious lies. They create elaborate realities that feel true because you desperately want them to be true. I didn't just lose money. I lost my belief in my own competence, my trust in human connection, my confidence that I could build a meaningful life. That loss is permanent. The money might have been recoverable if I'd been more careful, more skeptical, more willing to walk away when warning signs appeared. But I wasn't, because I wanted the fantasy more than I valued the reality. If my story prevents even one person from making the same mistake, then perhaps this catastrophic loss serves some purpose. But I suspect most people reading this will think, as I once did, that they're too smart to fall for such an obvious scam. And maybe they are. Or maybe they're simply waiting for their own Nari to appear, offering exactly what they want to hear, at exactly the moment they're most vulnerable to hearing it. Mike Reynolds closed his laptop after finishing the article, walked to the small balcony of his apartment, and looked out over Chiang Mai's evening skyline, temple spires illuminated against darkening mountains, the distant sound of traffic and temple bells, the warm tropical air that had once felt like promise and now simply felt like permanence. He would never return to America. He would never recover what he'd lost. He would live the rest of his life in modest circumstances, working to survive rather than enjoying retirement, carrying the weight of his catastrophic mistake until age or illness ended the burden. The golden trap had closed completely, and there was no escape except the slow passage of time and the eventual mercy of forgetting. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, or if you know someone who might benefit from hearing it, please share this video and subscribe to this channel. These stories matter. These warnings matter, and your support helps ensure they reach the people who need them most.